it gives me so much pleasure to be in the same county as Steve Averill, and I'm in the same city, in the same borough, in the same room, and we, it sounds like we're great, but we love our poster. And everyone, okay, you know what? It's not just us. Everyone loves our poster. And it's a Steve Averill production, and it's we're annoying customers, by the way, of graphic designers. Oh, like, could you? So thank you for doing such a beautiful thing. And when I came into the venue yesterday to kind of set things up, and Deirdre had hung these. Yeah. These, what you're seeing is Steve Averill's design, but the poster board is owned by the Minister for Education. and Deirdre thought, who deserves them more? So she repurposed the Minister for Education's poster boards to give them a better use. So I like that. That's punk rock at work. So I'm going to have a chat with Steve Averill, just a little bit about his life and work and inspiration. And then Steve, because he's Steve Averill, took photographs of some of his priceless artifacts, publications, and generally there's only one copy in Ireland of some of the things, and it's Steve, because he's collected his sources of inspiration. So it's the I'm not going to say goodbye after this, but this is the end session of what has been an incredible day for me in terms of learning and meeting lovely people. You've got a microphone, and I think you have to use it, or you won't be heard.
1, 2.
Fantastic.
1, 2.
Okay, lovely. Steve, you said something to me really interesting a long time ago, that you were equally fascinated by the music as by all the things surrounding it, including it, and to hear Niall, like to sit beside Niall, you know, talking about what records felt like and what they meant, and you'd look at every single thing of it, like it. So, where did you get where did music come into your house when you were growing up, and where did it become yours rather than?
Neither of my parents were particularly musical. So I suppose my introduction to music was like 5, 6 years old, was through the radio. And I would have been aware of somebody like Elvis Presley at 5 years, 6 years old, but not to a degree. But having been born in 1950, I was 13 in 1963. And that was absolutely mind-blowing. You know, you suddenly got the Beatles, you got all that thing. And I very quickly began to delve into where the sources of this music came from, but not immediately, not straight away. So I went from liking the Beatles and the Rolling Stones, who were I considered to be pop music because they were on the radio, and I began to then explore in the rhythm and blues area, for instance. You got them. You've got the Yardbirds, you've got the Pretty Things, who are even dirtier, harder than the Rolling Stones, you know, so that was the kind of thing. But to get back to basics, I loved comics, I loved all that stuff growing up. So at the age of 13, when I was asked what I wanted to do, I said I wanted to be what was then called a commercial artist. So somewhere to combine the elements of graphics and the elements of music. That's really what I wanted to do.
That young.
Yeah. You know, even when I right through then 13, when I went to 16 in school, what do you want to be? I want to be a commercial artist. And they look at me and say, well, I suppose the best we can do is get you the best leaving cert we can, because they had no idea what it is. And what happened was, I finished my leaving cert, and I went to work in London for 3 months, which surprised me completely that my mother let me go to London on my own. And I worked in Boots the Chemist in Regent Street, and that was in 1969. The back door of the shop where I worked led onto Carnegie Street. So it was like you spent your much time in Carnegie Street looking at clothes and things like that. You went to clubs every weekend. You stayed up all night on a Friday, went to work on Saturday morning. But what I really want to talk about mainly today were the slides I've chosen. These come from two sources mainly. They come from some of the graphic elements of the 1960s. People like Oz magazine and all those kind of things, and also then into the punk era. You can see some of the collages of punk graphics and things like that. I don't see such a big divide as some people do between the 60s and the 70s. I found that the people that I met in London I met McFarren in the Deviants. I saw the Deviants playing in Trafalgar Square. They were my social awareness, because in essence they were as aware of political and sociological aspects as anything was there. So I began to see people like the Edgar Broughton Band, as I say, the Deviants, and funnily enough, although earlier people were saying Pink Floyd were kind of like airy-fairy, early Pink Floyd, where I felt quite punk in their attitudes. They were people who couldn't really play, and they just experimented with like 30-minute long songs. And with Syd Barrett, they had a really unusual person at the front, a singer-songwriter. But anyway, that's a little bit of the background. We'll go through some of these and I'll try and give you a bit of commentary. This is a book that came out in the late 60s called Underground Graphics. There is a book you'll see that I've taken sources from later on called Punk in Print. The two of these to me are very similar because they look at the sort of graphics that were available to this is a poster for The Crazy World of Arthur Brown, done by a team called Hapsash and the Coloured Coat, who also worked in Granny Takes a Trip. They designed clothes as well as posters, and they made an album which is unfortunately years ago I lent to somebody who I never got it back from, a very rare album. And Hapsash and the Coloured Coat recorded an album in the studio with Guy Stevens, the guy who produced The Clash, producing it. Very similar kind of music, very much free and easy going. This is Martin Sharp, who was very much involved with Oz magazine, and that's a Jimi Hendrix poster that he did. Colour was a lot more available because Xerox machines really hadn't come into their own in the 60s, so you found there was a lot of printers, local printers who would print local newspapers, who would also do what is the equivalent of fanzines in those days. Nasty Tales was a comic that was put together by McFarren. Gandalf's Garden, well, that's a real hippie psychedelic typing with lots of things. It was again the newspaper of the underground. The underground was counterculture, and the underground was kind of the equivalent to what punk became in the very beginning. It was music that was very much in small clubs, not really made mainstream at all. Although some of the acts eventually moved mainstream, they were largely playing to very small audience. That again is Martin Sharp, a cream image that he used. That's an Oz poster. Oz was a magazine that was produced by 3 people around the time, and it was kind of very much, they felt that if you had a problem reading, you shouldn't be reading it, because they had a great knack of printing types with colours that you shouldn't really never match together, because it makes the type almost illegible. But that's the famous school kids issue, which became a huge court case. They asked several school kids to edit the magazine. they got charged with obscenity and taken to court over it. But these are all from a book called The Art of British Rock. That's McFarren. That's a great book, a very early kind of punk seminar called Watch Out Kids. And McFarren talks about all of his motivations and what he did to try and get the underground going. And his book, Give the Anarchist a Cigarette, is also a very good memoir of that era and that time. Okay, so that's that one. That's a poster for one of the big events in the underground. That was Mike McHenry did that one, 24-hour Technical Dream. You can see the list of bands that played at it. Pretty Things, Purple Gang, Pete Townsend, Soft Machine, Social Deviants, a massive lineup, 24-hour event. is in a huge big hall in the Alexandra Palace Hall and things like that. But a great, we don't really get those kind of events with punk until a lot later, where there's so many people involved. And it was a scene where people help each other out all the time, and you know, bands play together and they help each other in many, many ways. This is part of Nasty Tales, one of the comics that they did about a guy getting arrested by the police and the whole thing. And that's when you're smashing the steak, kids, don't forget to keep a smile on your lips and a song in your heart. This then moves on to the punk era. This is a very, very good book called Punc 45, which collects together an awful lot of the punk graphics of the era. And what you see next is quite a collage of the pages from that magazine. There's, you know, early Clash sleeves. And what's noticeable about these is, although I think our friend Russ has done a book on punk, he's kind of concentrated to some degree on the kind of do-it-yourself era. But I find when I went through all these sleeves, a lot of these were designed by people who were part of that movement, but were also young graphic designers who were in college or whatever, went on to careers as graphic designers. So that's, for instance, a bunch of 999 sleeves, you know, and they're very graphically aware of what they were trying to do. That great logo of a ticket stub with the word 999 is something that's lasted a long time and used very, very well. Jam sleeves, and one with the jolt. But again, you can see the use of a logo, and everything else is very, very important to the way they're done, and the image of the band. Buzzcocks, these are really, I love these sleeves. I think that they're, Paul was talking about taking on the Buzzcocks, but you know, these really kind of show the way they work together as a graphic element of the whole thing. So they're more of the Buzzcocks 7-inch sleeves. Then Generation X, another band with a very, very graphic sensibility that carried through when they moved into 60s, Sputnik into Billy Idol's own graphic sensibility. A great adverts cover. That was done by Barney Bubbles, who is kind of my main hero in graphic design. I just love his work, the fact that he was so subversive and quite often never put his name to the work he did. He just thought it was too egotistic to do that. There's 2 Chiswick records, the label we were on, Johnny Moped, and 2 Johnny Moped singles, and then the Mozillos. Again, you see that sensibility of graphics where they have created a logo and carry that sort of through the entire part of what they were doing. And it's a band I never heard of before. As 3 samples in the book that they chose from the Radiators catalogue. The logo on the television screen single, I drew that one day just really for that single, nothing else. I just wanted to, you know, kind of reflect what we called our blitzkrieg rock approach to what punk was. I mean, we didn't, as many of the early bands, we didn't use punk. We said we were suburban, high-energy, white rock and roll blues. That's what we call it, but punk is a much better way to describe it. But it also, the punk name came from really bands of the 60s. A lot of the bands that were in the garage bands in the 60s were called punk rockers. So it was a word that sort of came back into use around this time. That's a 1988 book. That's basically a fanzine, but fanzine has been published and done by a major company, Caroline Coolidge was a journalist. She ran the what's it called, it was a drug awareness program. Liberty. Yeah, and then she also wrote for Melody Maker and did that. But that's pages from the book and the Clash in the 101 Club. And not forgetting the girls around the slits and playing in support there. Very important that there was that recognition of girls in bands playing around that time. This is the other book I mentioned that similar to the underground graphics. This is also pretty good book. This was the one that features a great many of the fanzines and the stick down letters and the whole ethos of that particular style of writing. So you get whipped and torn. That's a poster for the Down and the Poly. Sex Pistols Turbo, and that poster, that's a lot more designed. That was Jamie Reid who did the cover of their Never Mind the Bollocks album, he did that poster as well. Nowhere Boredom, that's where this one's going very, very fast. But very strong vital aspect. That their influence with that cut-up lettering has kind of lasted right through the whole punk era. Heartbreakers, these are all gig posters and things that I've done. The Vortex Club and the Roxy Club. Another Clash poster in Chelsea. These are very much done by people working around the band to produce the posters for that. A great old Down poster for the first album, which has a great part of that pie in the face that they were then on Stiff Records. One of the Sex Pistols posters with the Queen image on it. Sniffing Glue, that's number 4 in the Clash. That's Mark Perry, who did that. This badge is actually from Mark Perry's band, Action Time Vision. ATV was the name of the band, but he was always, in fact, I think when one of the few people that actually was wrote good things about the Radiators when we first came to London. Badges, another part of the whole punk and the way it came out. Always very, very collectible and still sought after these days. This is another book I liked a great deal. This is called The Year of Punk and New Wave, written by a Dutch writer, and he lists every band that were around at the time with a little biography of them, what they released and where the bands came from. But in the centre of the book is a colour selection of collage of pictures of the various bands that were around. Sort of A to Z of, ATV, the band, Blitzkrieg Pop, then the Clash, Gamma Bishops, the Cortiners, and eventually it gets to later P.O. and we get to a little glimpse of the Radiators there and Pete on the cover, and then we see the rest of it on the other side of the poster. So the Rosilios, Rumour, Tom Robertson Band, Static Rats, or where they were, Sex Pistols, Screwdriver, Slow from the Dog, Sham 69. But it's a really interesting collage of all those imagery together. And then now the sequence with the Jam. I was going to say the Killers, Joe Cohen, the Killers, I think it was called, boxing music, Johnny Moped, Elvis Costello, again some of Barney Rubbles is great work, a great Damn cover. That's and this is back to the Punk and New Wave book. This is Barney Bubbles at his very, very best. I mean, I just think his work is superb. The Inverurie songbook is absolutely fantastic because it's basically done in just 2 colours all the way through, and he manages to illuminate his lyrics really, really well. So you don't need to hear music to really understand how good they were. And that famous blockhead logo, which is wonderful. This is one I threw in. This is Mark Musper, who is of course a member of Devo, and he was an artist in college, and he was an artist after college. My son Gareth was over at an exhibition in the States, and this book was on sale. Now it was on sale for something like he said it was like $200 for a signed copy, and like $60 for the unsigned copy. So I bought the unsigned copy, and then saw Mark Mullins were sitting over in a cafe having a cup of coffee. I went over to him and said, "My dad loves Devo." So Mark Mullins was like, "Devo loves you too." Inside the book. But I love Devo. I think Devo were, you might not call them exactly punk, but certainly their attitude to art, to what they did, and their documentary about what they did and how they did it is an incredible piece of work. That's their live Bougie Boy. These are postcards that he did, hand-drawn and often postcards that he completed, a whole sets of postcards, which are really, really invigorating and exciting in the way he did it. This is again, I wanted to put this in here because this is Milton Glaser and Miko, who are essentially very, very serious graphic designers, well-renowned, but it how what I would call the ethos of punk graphics is has been used and assumed to do. One of the best things you can do as a graphic designer is do work that actually has a message to it. And even the way this cover is done is quite good. But this is as good as anything you're going to get today, or is good for business. I mean, what else can you say about what's going on today? So these are some of the books that I took my graphics from. I think was involved in Too Fast to Live, Too Young to Die book. Punks on 45 by John Savage, and the art of British rock, which I put a few things there for earlier on. So now we move on to a little bit more detail about the Radiators, and this is a lyric sheet that we did for TV Tube Art, and this was done in pure fanzine style. This is like P was talking about getting a typewriter. I got hold of a typewriter and I typed all the lyrics out from this. You know, so there's probably a lot of spelling mistakes in it, and that's the cover of this is a re-release of TV Tube Art that we did through wrote a vision on the whole thing, and it's it was the 40th anniversary around then of the first album. This is a 10-inch version of it. What I did was I hadn't cut the die cut in the centre, so the TV screen, you can take the inner sleeve out and turn it around, and you get one of those two images through it, plus the image of the band that was taken in our rehearsal bedroom out in Portmarnock when we were rehearsing there. But it shows the power of what vinyl can do, even in 10-inch, 12-inch. I'm not totally against the graphics on the CD. I think CDs can be very, very interesting too, but I think this really, really works very, very well. These are 7-inch singles. And again, it's what's interesting about them. The left-hand, top left is the cover as it came out in the UK. The blue cover came out in Ireland, which we were absolutely shocked when we got it in a box of these singles. We said, well, it was supposed to be black and yellow like the English version. The answer was, actually, the printer said he had blue in the machine when he was doing it. So that's what happened. That's the joys of it. The Midnight Demos. That came out on it was the demos we did for the TV Tube, for the television screen. Came out released as an EP. Enemies, again, that's part of the bedroom shoot, which was quite funny because I set the camera up on a tripod with a typewriter. And I posed the band, and I had to run into the picture in like 5 seconds before it went click. So there's quite a few pictures of me going, from the picture. Likewise, the next one there is the same from that. The bottom three where we utilised graphics as opposed to pictures of the band to do it. That was a friend of mine who, an illustrator called Ronnie Nevin, who lived in Belfast, and he had done the black and white version of that drawing, and we coloured it in for the single sleeve. But I think it sums up the song really, really well. Album covers, the original TV Tube Art, and then Ghost Town on the reissue of that. That's the second issue of Ghost Town, with that Philip added Under Cleary's Club to the version of it, and one of his other songs. The different versions, Trouble Pilgrims came out in a number of different versions and cover. That's Sound City Beat, which I think is still one of if you don't know much about the beat group here in the 60s, it's our versions of a lot of those songs, and it's Philip's sleeve note is absolutely very, very informative about that era and what was happening with Buying Golden Heaven was a hot wire release, the best of at the time. Then this is the recent release of the Hawkins House gig, where we reformed for an AIDS benefit, even though I couldn't spell benefit. It's a penny fit as opposed to benefit.
I thought I was so punk, that good on them. Like, I hate the English language.
Or just being stupid. We got some great sleeve notes from Joe. Joe managed to do that, and he did a great job of writing because he explained to me how much the gig meant to him at the time, and then it was the first time we'd gotten together in a long time with Mark rejoining the band, and Pete and Philip and Jimmy and myself. And that's it for that part of it. So at this point, is there any, what time is it now? It's coming to 5:15. If there's any questions or there's any things you'd like me to explain more, I'm quite happy to talk about any of those things. Or to listen, not like to ask me more questions.
Yeah, like, because it's my thing. Like, I will savagely eat up those 15 minutes.
Yeah.
And at this stage, let's have some audience questions. But I think you're great, but after seeing that, I'm slightly revising my opinion. Because I remember buying a Radiators single and thinking, this kind of looks weird, but it's the Radiators and it's Steve Averill, so it must be saying something. And they've used blue, and it looks kind of weird. So I assumed, like, oh, you know, you've sat and thought about that for hours.
Yeah, I did.
But it's because the printer
had blue in the machine when he was printing. I mean, Niall will probably have some stories like that. Printers, when you get the print back, Irish printers were not exactly the finest printers in the world. One particular printer that used to print a lot of Irish sleeves had a shed, and they were sort of printed in the shed, and you know, the cover could come up upside down. You didn't sort of indicate exactly. Well, I've had a sleeve where the inner sleeve is upside down, and but not deliberately. One of my favourite sleeves of all time is Barney Bubbles did an Elvis Costello single called "Accidents Will Happen." And I remember when I was working in Golden Disc, people would bring in and say, there's something wrong with this, the picture is on the inside. And I said, yes, do you not realise what the title says? Accidents can happen, you know. But Barney always had a great sense of humour to his work, which I really, really, really like, and try wherever possible to introduce humour into it when they can.
Okay, so I'm going to ask you one question, and then I'm going to let the real people ask some questions. But what else would Barney Bubbles have, like, he wasn't just doing album sleeves, were these people making a living beyond the music industry?
No, Barney never made the kind of money that he did work initially in a advertising agency, and that's where he did his training and his whole thing. But then he began to, I mean, and although he was the house graphic designer for Stiff Records, as I say, his career goes back. He designed the Hawkwind album covers, you know, In Search of Space and all those, they were by him. He did bands like Quiver, and so he did a lot of 60s bands. He also did posters, he also did books and magazines as well. But he always did it with a certain humility, and he always thought the young designers coming up were deserving of credits that he didn't need or want or whatever. But unfortunately, he was a very probably, I don't know, bipolar, I don't know. The late Brian Griffin, the photographer who I got to know a little bit, was a fantastic friend of Brian's. I really wanted Brian to work with Brian on as many projects. Unfortunately, I only ever got to work with him once, and that was on the Cactus World News cover, because when they described what they wanted for the picture, I said, well, there's only one photographer I recommend that can do that. And luckily they were then signed to an English label, so the budget was there to do it. So Brian came to Dublin and we shot up on Hope Head with the band. He always said to me his biggest regret was he was on a shoot and he got a call from, or there was a missed call from, and this is before mobile phones, but he got a message that said that Brian was looking for him. And unfortunately, Brian Greenholder then took his life the same day. So he always felt that he missed out on maybe helping somebody. But I just know from the nature of suicide, if somebody's in that frame of mind, it's very, very hard to change that situation. But anyway, let's move on to slightly something happier, and I'm happy if anybody's got a particular question they would like to ask.
Oh yeah, and there's a microphone, there's a roving microphone, so
just raise your hand.
Yeah, or raise your hands. You're punks, just shout.
Yeah, it's not that big.
So Steve Averill is here in the room, so please. Oh, there's a new boy.
Thanks. I just want to say, obviously I play with Stephen in the Trouble Pilgrims, but I've known him for many, many years in the advertising business, and I've learned so much from Stephen. But I just want to say out loud that, you know, I'm a guy who jumps on a bike at 5 o'clock and go home, and I'd jump on the bike at 3 o'clock if I could most days. But Stephen's work rate and diligence, like he stayed to midnight, 5 nights a week working. And you come in the morning thinking you're a martyr at 8 o'clock, but Stephen's already got 2 hours on the clock before you. So I'm just really wanting to say, Stephen, that your work and contribution is just so phenomenal.
Well, thanks, Tony. And part of it, I'm a little uncomfortable with it. I don't say deification, but I'm a little bit uncomfortable because I really think that the best work I've done is work that's been done in collaboration with other people. When I think about good designers, I think about 480 records and covers like that. One of the reasons, as Tony mentioned, that you work with late hours is you're trying to run a small four-man design company. Basically, to survive, you've got to keep working. The good thing about what we did in that role was everything was kind of very, very different. So even though clients can be the worst, I mean, in the rock and roll industry, you can be trying to please 4 people at once. You've got the record label has got to say, the band has got to say, the band's management has got to say, and the record company, PR company's got to say, and often they can be so diverse that you're trying to struggle to get something together that really is coherent, that everybody can love. I would say that vast majority of the U2 work, the cover that you see is the point where all 4 members agree on that. If you'd followed any individual member, you'd be going down a different path. So you're all the time trying to do it. And in record company jobs, to keep the company going, you need to finish a job. So even when you can see that a cover that you really like is beginning to get watered down or changed or done differently. One example that I will feature in my next, I do this talk as well, called My Life in 12 Sleeves, was the first My Emotional Fish album cover, where the management, the A&R guy, the band and myself had all agreed on a cover, which was a beautiful portrait by a guy called Ian Thulier, which we all thought really summed up the album, but it was nixed by the PR company. So no, we have to have a picture of the band on the cover. So if you actually look at that album cover, it's a blurred picture of the band in a field, a cornfield, which is about as useless as you can possibly get a band picture to be. But they were happy with it and with that. But in future presentations, I'll actually show you what the original cover would have been. So all the time you're trying to walk this tightrope of commercial success and getting paid for the job you started, and also coming up with something that you really like. I mean, I'm first to admit, I'd say there's 40% of the work I've done I think is rubbish. It's not great, but I'm very pleased of that portion of the music that I think is really, I've worked very, very hard to achieve that success with it.
Danielle?
So nobody else wants to know? Okay, well my question to you was what inspired you to, what inspired you to create the poster for this event? To me, it's very Irish and it's very Oscar Wilde. I just wanted to know what was the inspiration for this?
That was the inspiration. Michael sent me a brief, and he said, I saw the word fanzine and punk, and I was thinking all this kind of stick down lettering. He said, no, we'd like something in this little bit Charles McIntosh. And I said, oh, okay, well that's a brief. And luckily enough, I have quite a resource of elements of Art Nouveau and Art Deco in my file. So I looked through them all and I found the border, and I knew somewhere in my collection of fonts I had this particular font, which was created by is a version of a Rennie Mackintosh font. And there are about 4 or 5 different variations on the same thing. It's also a font that I think has been used by Led Zeppelin on one of their album covers as well, so it kind of reminds me of that. But now seeing it in context, I think it's a graphic that can be used going forward. It still, will work in that way. But I wanted to kind of, in a way, illuminate a little bit of the fanzine idea of it. And in fanzines, we stuck letters down, letter by letter, for headings and things like that. And I then went into the print machine and we photographed it, and it always used to have lines between it. And then usually what we do is paint the lines out. But in the fanzine context, you often saw these lines showing up, or the uneven nature of the way the type is. So I wanted to illuminate that in the poster, so that it wasn't just the printed book thing, but it was about the fanzine ethos as well.
Yeah, can I just jump in there?
No.
That makes it sound like I know the fuck what I'm talking about. So I emailed Steve Averill. I had to sit down before I emailed him, thinking, like, and said, Steve, like, would you help us with a poster? Because we had posters and they were good, but good. Said, would you possibly do one? And I said, yeah, I could. Do you have anything in mind, maybe? And so I had three things,
very diverse.
Yeah, here are three guidelines. And one is, would you do it like if the Book of Kells had been designed by two illiterate punks? So that's why he didn't go for that. Two was, would you do it like Simple Minds' New Gold Dream, 81, 82, 83, 84, the 12 inches around then? Malcolm Garrett didn't go for that, and I said, and there was some Scottish bloke who did some design. So that's how sophisticated my thinking was. But I knew that anything he would do would be good. And then it came back where Niall saw it and then Deirdre saw it. But like, this is better than our festival. Like, it's worth having a festival just to be able to display this poster.
Well, so, I mean, to say, I did look at the New Gold Dream idea as well, and look, but I felt that you need a full colour poster, and one of the things that you wanted to do was eventually use it for print on t-shirts. Yeah. So then you'd be looking at a 5 or 6 colour print, which is kind of not practical. Yeah. So that's why I went that.
Thank you. There was a question.
Yeah, sorry, Steve. And I know we're nearly done. So just a kind of two-pronged question is, Tony mentioned you staying late at night. Like, do you not get to the stage where like, I'm going home, I can't come up with something? Like, do you hit that block? And what happens when you hit that, like that mental block? Or like, does that happen? And just another thing, if you were in a band, not that your bands would have ever done this, of course, but if you heard something good, you're going, I'm going to get that and put it into a song. I'm going to put my own stamp on it and put it into a song. Do you do that with your graphics, where you see something, go, oh yeah, I could do something with that and make it my own?
Oh, of course. I mean, that's why I keep a large archive of material. Now, it was very funny when online came in and we had a lot of young designers working in the company. The attitude from most of the young guys was, you don't need these books anymore. Don't. You can get anything you want online. And in fact, you can't. Because I had a lot of books from photographic libraries that were what you might call creative photography. Now, if you type in creative photography online, you get all sorts of shite, because they don't know what you're talking about. Whereas these books were photographers who had a vision and creativity. So I remember once working with Elvis Costello on a cover. He said, come down to the studio, listen to as much of the albums we have kind of in a state to listen to, which was about 8 or 9 tracks. And he told me, the title, which was, I think, Cruel Smile, or oops, maybe I got the wrong word. But anyway, that was around the title. So he said, listen to the tracks and go away and come back. And so I would spend a late night going through all these photographic books and marking a particular page and saying, this image, I think, says something to me, and to do it. So the next day I went back to him and I said, there's 5 choices here, but there's one I think is absolutely ideal for the album and the title and the music you're making. I'm not going to tell you which one it is. If, just to prove, I said there's a sticker on the page I've marked. On the back of that sticker it says, there's an X if you pick the one that I like a lot. He went through them, he thought about it, and he said, that one. I said, turn the sticker over, and that was the one that I pictured. So that was a random image that we'd both chosen to suit the music. And I used to have this trick in the studio. I worked with a lot of different photographers, and I would say to photographers, look, if you've got anything you've taken, end of a roll or something you've just done for yourself, something random that you think is kind of weird and odd, give me a transparency, and I'll keep it in my I had a tin suitcase, and I said, I'll keep it in there. And sometimes when the bands came in and they didn't know what they wanted, I said, here, go through it and see if there's anything that appeals to you. And sometimes they would pick an image that I could see why it would work, but I would never have chosen that random image where it is. So the nature of randomness in your work is an important part of, especially in the more punky graphics. You know, you find something like I recently worked with Tony and so on, and we were talking about a way of doing it, and we were talking about slide frames. And I said, I have a box of slide frames from the 60s that a friend of mine said to me, why don't you go down to the camera club in Dublin? He said, on certain monthly meetings or whatever, go down to the bin and they'll dump out all the slides that they don't like in the bin. So I went down and scooped up loads of slides to it, because my first, as Paul Charles was talking about, his getting into the music industry was by promoting. My first, when the realization came to me that I couldn't play an instrument, I couldn't sing, was how the hell do I get involved in this? I mean, later when Punc came, I thought, okay, I can be a performance artist and pretend to be a singer on the stage. But I started doing light shows. And I got in touch with a friend of mine in London who was the editor of Zigzag magazine. And I said, do you know anybody who does light shows and might give me some advice? And the guy who does these light shows for Hawkwind and people like that wrote me this long letter, which I still think I have somewhere in my phone, but I couldn't believe it. He told me all the secrets of doing a light show, how to make things move and bubble and the whole things. So we would get these projectors, and we would have 3 different projectors on stage, you know, with different images. And one of the things he told me was, remove the heat filters from a projector, from the old rank eldest tutor things, and the slide will burn in front of you and the whole thing. So unfortunately, many of the slides I got from the bin out of Coaching went up in things like that. But we would have another slide at the same time, so you'd have all these 3, and also the liquid slides where you'd put oil-based ink and water-based ink together, and you put it into the slide and they would boil, which is where you see a lot of the Pink Floyd type of graphics happening. So I really enjoyed that, doing that, and then, you know, the graphics was the next way to get deeply involved in the music industry, but I'm still doing it.
Doing it well. What a lovely way to end that, and it's 5:30, so we do have to thank you to everyone. Thank you to Steve Averill for headlining a fantastic day. Sorry we didn't get your question. Thank you so much to Stephen on the sound, but not just on the sound, on making this a lovely, comfortable event. Deirdre Geraghty is 100% responsible for opening this fabulous place to us and inviting us, and she was sending me emails at 11 o'clock last night doing things, you know, it's just taking care of things that we hadn't thought of, and just anticipating our needs and being there for us. So thank you very much. Final thing is, we don't know how to promote events. We can't be arsed to learn. I'm too old to learn how to do it. Social media, we now despise. So we're going to do more of these. The plan is to do one every 6 months. If you feel inclined, if you don't hate the internet as much as we do, we've got a scrapbook there, and if you could put your email there if you felt like it, we will email you once every 6 months, just telling you where the next one is and who's at it, and that would be fantastic. Is there anything else, Niall, before I go?
Maybe a bit of archive, just if there's anybody has.
Yeah, we've set up a National Pop Archive because no one else has, so just don't throw anything out. If you have anything that's worth money, sell it or keep it. But if you have something that you think, I'm sitting on stuff and I've got 3 copies of it, or I don't have room for it, then please get in touch with us, because so much great stuff has been thrown into skips.
I also would say that Michael has been down with me, and we are hoping to have an exhibition later in the year, because my archive, I have a lot of 60s to 70s to 80s magazines and things like that. So we're hoping to put something together that visually would be interesting for people to see.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so thank you.
Thank you.
It's been an incredible day.